Good day, everybody, and welcome to day 85 of the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. And we're going to jump right into our analysis today. We're going to start in the Kharkov area. It would appear that Ukrainian offensive operations, counter-offensive operations, are continuing to slow down in the face of Russian counterattacks, and more specifically, both tactical air attack and obviously very heavy artillery attacks. We do know that the Ukrainians have deployed fairly significant amounts of the new M777 155 millimeter howitzers against Russian forces in this area, and we do know that the Russians are now actively suppressing those assets. We have documented video evidence that Russians are now targeting those 155 millimeter U.S. supplied howitzers in a fairly effective manner. In certain video clips, you will clearly see that Russian drones are monitoring those Ukrainian 155 batteries, and then you further see the Russians start to strike those artillery assets with artillery fire or either direct tactical aircraft. But we do know there's a lot of focus right now on Russian efforts to degrade and destroy those Ukrainian weapon systems that have been supplied from the West, specifically those M777 batteries. Obviously, they're fairly large systems that require truck convoys, and they also require significant amounts of ammunition to supply those batteries or those artillery battalions that are being directed towards and against Russian forces. So the Russians are again locating those batteries and those battalion sets, and then going about and destroying those systems. And we do know that multiple batteries have now been hit by Russian forces. It is assumed that the Ukrainians have deployed right around 70 of these M777 howitzers. And we don't know how many have been destroyed as of yet, but we do know that the Ukrainians now possess less than in prior days because of continued Russian activity. We continue to see the Russians apply an immense amount of pressure in the Severodonetsk area. They're looking to create the smaller pocket, not the larger pocket, and in all probability, they're right now they're focusing on the smaller pocket closer to Severodonetsk because of some of the challenges and some of these river crossings that the Russian forces faced in prior operations. We do know that the Russians are paying very close attention to Popasnaya and continue a multi-front advance within the vicinity of Popasnaya. They've obviously, the Russians have secured Popasnaya well over a week ago. And we now see that the Russians are now driving to the north towards Severodonetsk, to the what would be more or less the north westerly direction towards Lyman and Izum, and then obviously additionally to the southwest and south, and supporting efforts to operations within the Donetsk to the north of Donetsk area of operations. But right now, the real focus of the Russians at this point is a small encirclement of Severodonetsk, while at the same time we do continue to see Russian forces push closer and closer. We do know Russian forces have now entered Severodonetsk. Spetsnaz and reconnaissance elements have entered the town and are fighting house to house pitched battles with Ukrainian forces. We also know that Ukrainian forces have withdrawn some of its assets within the confines of Severodonetsk and have probably moved some of those assets closer to areas such as Bakhmut, Kramatorsk, and Sloviansk. That will be the next defensive line if and when Severodonetsk falls. I would say at this point, given Russian perseverance and application of a tremendous amount of both assets and firepower, the Russians are probably going to seize control of Severodonetsk. They're probably going to pocket a fairly sizable amount of Ukrainian forces that are operating within this area where my cursor is kind of circling within the confines of Severodonetsk. The Ukrainians are really applying almost a Stalinist methodology of not one step back. They are fighting very tenaciously, and I have to give them credit in terms of showing that sort of a very defensive, tenacious fight that they are continuing to conduct against Russian forces. I mean, obviously we saw it in Mariupol, and just recently now we do know that just under 2,000 fighters had remained in the metallurgical fortress area. It appears that they were running out of food and supplies and really just had no choice but to eventually surrender. But again, just under 2,000 Ukrainian forces now have surrendered, and obviously the Russians are now in full control over Mariupol. So can we expect the same sort of resistance in Severodonetsk, areas such as Bakhmut, Kramatorsk, and Sloviansk that we observed in Mariupol? And I would say possibly. Obviously, past performance could be an indicator of future results in terms of the fighting capacity of Ukrainian forces. Now, with that being said, we also know that the Ukrainian military is under immense pressure. Now, it's not getting a lot of discussion in mainstream media. Anytime you listen to mainstream media or you listen to Ukrainian press reports, information coming out of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, it's always very positive. It's always very propagandish, in which they try to articulate that they are in fact winning the war and doing very well. Now, the reality is a little bit different. Are they performing probably much better than many analysts and even generals? General Milley, for instance, had predicted. Well, yes, absolutely they are. They're also getting probably a lot more assistance in this ongoing conflict than I think the Ukrainians even believed that they were going to initially get. I don't think that even the Ukrainians had believed that some sort of lend-lease, the likes of which we saw during World War II, in terms of the direct infusion of cash and aid and weapon systems to the Ukrainian state, would be handed over like it is being handed over now. You got to understand, the United States are now pushing a $40 billion support deal to the Ukrainians. And that $40 billion, I mean, again, I talked about prior that is like the defense budget of some of the larger nation states in Europe. So a huge amount of weapon systems and direct intelligence support being supplied to the Ukrainians, but at the same time, the Russians really do not appear to be wanting to give any ground in terms of what it is looking to accomplish, and we're really seeing that right now, especially in the eastern Donbass, with the application of Russian force and how much force is being utilized by the Russians. At the same time, we continue to see kind of some weirdness in this conflict as well, in which some targets, such as in downtown Kiev, have still not been hit by Russian forces. If the Russians really wanted to silence Zelensky, they probably have the ability to do that. And they also have the ability to disrupt some of the command and control elements that are located in Kiev, and we have not seen that yet take place by the Russians? And as I've talked about before, is there a possibility that some sort of backdoor agreement has been made in which the Russians would not strike certain sensitive targets, and thereby the Ukrainians would not strike deep into the Russian Federation with some of its assets that we know the Ukrainians could in fact deploy against Russian forces? Now, I think if those agreements have been established, I think they're being tested right now, especially with some of the activity in the Black Sea, such as the sinking of the flagship of the Black Sea fleet, and some ongoing targeting that is occurring by Ukrainian forces as well. But I would say that at this point, the gloves have not been completely taken off by either side, but at the same time, the fighting is incredibly intense in terms of what we're seeing in the Donbass region. In fact, we do know that a lot of these Western volunteers that have entered Ukraine to support the Ukrainian military and in all probability directly fight against the Russians have come under some withering fire that some of these Western mercenaries or volunteers have really never seen before in some of their past experiences, such as in Afghanistan, Iraq, or what have you. And this is a type of war that really hasn't been seen in many decades. And what I mean by that is just the sheer intensity of what is happening. We're also starting to continue to see the Russians maneuver outside of the scope of staying to main roads and highways. We're starting to see the Russians now maneuver overland and not stick to these main arterial routes that allowed for the Ukrainians to ambush these long columns of Russian forces. And we are starting to see the Russians, as I just said, go overland, not using main arterial routes. The ground is not as wet and soggy, at risk of getting stuck in the mud. That is prevalent in the early spring in Ukraine. Obviously, things are greening up, probably not getting as much rain as they normally would. Things are drying out, and thus allowing the Russians to start to maneuver a little bit more. But again, the Russians are applying immense pressure in the area of Severodonetsk. They continue to shape the battlefield kind of northwest of Severodonetsk in the area of Izum. The Russians have had to move some forces again, as I talked about in previous videos, to the Kharkov area of operations to prevent this ongoing Ukrainian counteroffensive, which does appear to be slowing down. And we do see the Russians utilizing a lot of its tactical air assets and long-range artillery to negate and slow down this Ukrainian operation as it starts to slow down. But again, that's about what we have for today. We'll continue to monitor and report and bring you daily information about what we're seeing on the battlefield. Thanks again for joining us, and we will talk again very soon.